I already did a lot of the bigger villains, like Penguin, Riddler, Catwoman in part 1. Now we'll be going over the next batch of characters, which are, I would say, include a lot of big characters too. Unlike my reference I said last episode, where I said that this episode was only going to be smaller characters. That was incorrect because I forgot while I was sorting them. Some of the characters I decided to put in here are not actually that small, like Hugo Strange and Azrael, Ghul, and Jerome. So there are some bigger characters in here, but also a lot of smaller ones like Magpie, Professor Pig, etc. Jerome. I think Jerome is probably the second best Joker I've ever seen behind Mark Hamill. Speaking of which, I love Jerome. I think Jerome's scenes are probably the only scenes anyone could say is almost as good as Batman the Animated Series. His talent show with Barbara was honestly one of the best live-action Batman scenes I've ever seen. That includes the Nolan Trinity, even. I think Jerome should have had a bigger role ongoing in the Batman mythos, as in, not dying. Well, I don't dislike Jeremiah. I think both Jerome and Jeremiah could have coexisted. For example, there's a three Jokers storyline, and all three Jokers coexist, and they build off each other, but they don't take away from each other. I think that could have worked with Jerome and Jeremiah. Instead of three Jokers, it'd be two. Or maybe you could introduce a third Joker and have them be triplets, although that might be pushing it. Still, I think Jeremiah and Jerome could have coexisted, and you didn't have to get rid of this great character. As I said in my last video, I really like Jeremiah and how he based his appearance on the Jack Nicholson version of Joker. Jerome could have been more of the other version of Joker where it's more gruesome and horrifying, while Jeremiah could be the more tactical type of version of the Joker. But that's just my opinion on it. I think both the Valeska brothers could have genuinely coexisted and been great villains together. And apart, they could have had a rivalry, seeing who is a better Joker. Either way, I think Jerome deserved better than being killed off so unceremoniously in the fourth season. Azrael. Theo is an interesting one, as while Azrael isn't a villain in the comics, and nor is his name Theo, he surely is a villain on the show. I thought he was an okay villain. I thought he could be very overdramatic at times, but I think I would have liked him to be Azrael a little bit longer, since his look was very stunning and very cool looking. I would have liked maybe him be an assassin for Hugo Strange a little bit longer, for him to be kind of like under his boot in a way. Although I could see some people not liking that, since a lot of people I know really like Theo. I found Theo kind of dramatic and a bit of a crybaby about his whole idea that because, his ancestor was a pervert and he got his hands cut off because he attempted to harm one of Bruce Wayne's ancestors, that he's going to go after Bruce Wayne. But I don't understand that. Why would he go after Bruce Wayne? Because we also find out that that's not even his great grandmother. That was his great aunt. So wouldn't it make more sense if he goes after like one of Bruce's distant cousins? It's just really confusing with certain things that are going on in the whole origin type thing. I think the character has some good lines and has some great moments as a villain and is very competent. But his origin just doesn't necessarily feel like his motivation itself, like his motivation and origin just don't. I feel like it doesn't really hold up. Because why is he so angry at Bruce? Bruce never did anything. Maybe that's just my opinion, but I find it really odd that his ancestor did something bad, which for some unknown reason means he's going to hurt the descendant of the ancestor that his ancestor tried to hurt. I just find that weird. But yet again, opinion can vary. Bane. Gotham's Bane is probably my favorite live-action Bane, and is the only one who's actually the correct ethnicity, as he's constantly whitewashed. I found his past work with Jim made him a villain that felt very strong and antagonizing, as he had a connection to one of the characters. Although I would say that in a way he does feel like kind of just a pawn for Nissa Al Ghul, which I think can bother some people. And I think if it bothers people, I can 100% understand it, as I'm not as big as a Bane fan than a lot of other people. I like Bane, but he's certainly not my favorite character. So that's really all I have to say about him. Nissa Al Ghul, Bane's partner. Well, I thought Nissa was fine, and I found her to be a little overdramatic at times. But I do have to say her plan was very thought out, and the fact she almost won was impressive. But I don't think she was final season, level of bad. I don't think she should have been the final season's big bad, as she is an okay villain, but she's not, I don't think, up to the mantle of characters like Jerome. I think Jerome would have been a much better villain for the final season of the show, or even Jeremiah. But no, we get Nissa. No offense to Nissa, by the way. I think, like I said, I thought she was an okay villain, but she's not as good as a lot of other villains. I would have also taken Lady Shiva, as she was meant to be in season 5, but for some unknown reason, she got written out, and Nissa was included. I would have preferred Shiva way more than Nissa. The characters are, I would say, somewhat similar, being female characters that are affiliated with assassins, but Lady Shiva is a lot cooler with her origin of, never being trained, always being trained to be like the best assassin, never learning anything else other than being the best assassin. Well, Nissa was really just a daddy's girl, and I felt like her motivation to kill Bruce was also, like Theo, didn't make much sense. I don't understand how it was Bruce's fault for Ra's al Ghul's death. That was completely Barbara. So her reasoning for wanting to go after Bruce Wayne doesn't really make sense when you think about it. Ra's al Ghul, another character who is constantly whitewashed in the Nolan films. While I appreciate they finally casted an actor of the right ethnicity, I felt like his character was, the boring version of himself from the comics. He felt like a parody, even. I thought his first few appearances were okay. Nothing amazing, but it was like, okay. But then it just went downhill. I felt like he became very boring, very dramatic, constantly monologuing. And the whole thing with the demon's head being a glowing hand that can let you see the future, I thought was ridiculous. I really disliked that whole letting him see the future, as that's not meant to be what he is. And I disliked the fact that they took out the Talia plot of him wanting to groom Bruce to be his heir by marrying his daughter, which it is weird, but it's better than, I think, his weird obsession with Bruce. His weird obsession with Bruce doesn't really make much sense. I mean, I guess he could see the future and see that he one day becomes Batman, but I felt like that was kind of a sorry excuse for a storyline in the comics that was really good. So I think Ra's al Ghul, in my opinion, was honestly very much not as good as he could have been, and I thought he was just kind of wasted and not necessarily done well. But like I said, opinions can vary. If you like Ra's al Ghul on the show, I am really sorry if I offended you. I personally did not like him on the show. Mr. Zsasz, the character I wish did a lot more on the show. Anthony, who plays him, I think is hilarious as a commentary, and I think should have been a series regular for the final 2 seasons at least. He is a great character on the show, and I think he generally should have done more. I liked him here even more than in the comics. I've never cared for Victor Zsasz in the comics. But in this show, I felt like Victor Zsasz became more fresh as the series goes on, as he really stands out when it comes down to all the other characters who are in the crime thing. Because even though he doesn't have powers or a gimmick per se, as he does technically have the whole cutting himself thing, but he only did that in the earlier seasons, and it was mentioned in the final season. But when he did the most, he didn't really did that cutting stuff. But he still was able to stand out by Anthony Carrigan's performance, as honestly, I found him to be a very intriguing villain, but also very funny, which I think is the perfect combination for, an intriguing villain you want. You want them to be intriguing, but you want them to have a gimmick that puts them above others. And I think while he doesn't exactly have his cunning gimmick, he has his humor, and it just works in my opinion. And I think this is the best version of Victor Zsasz there probably has ever been in any sort of media. Hugo Strange, another great villain, I found him to be a very competent individual, but also having a huge ego, only for him to learn that he wasn't actually as smart as he thought he was. It made him even more human. In the fact that we got to see the fact that this guy is very clearly just human, but he was playing God by making monsters in the basement and bringing back the dead. I thought that was very compelling and was very eerie. But I would say it's interesting because You would usually think that this would be more Dr. Frankenstein, but I didn't get that impression from Hugo Strange. I got more the living, like the human centipede movie type of deal with Dr. Hugo Strange, when a mad scientist is trying to create a human centipede. And if you've seen that movie, it's a bit much, but I think it's a pretty good comparison. Because, like, Hugo Strange, he was also making a monster, but he thought it was beautiful. Either way, I think Hugo Strange is a great character on the show. And similar to Victor Zsasz, I've never cared for Hugo Strange in the comics. And I think this version of Hugo Strange should also be implemented into the comic books because I honestly think that this is probably also one of the best versions of Hugo Strange I've ever seen, too. Ventriloquist. Similar to Clayface, Arthur Penn was meant to be given a far bigger role if the show got a season 6 and 7, but it didn't. So in the final season, he was killed off almost the minute he became the ventriloquist. And I think that was a major waste. But in all fairness to the show, it was really coming to an end, so they didn't have the time to, make the ventriloquist. So instead, he was killed off in the very episode he became the ventriloquist, or started to become the ventriloquist, which I think was a major waste. Well, I understand the fact they didn't have the time. I don't think they had to kill him. Couldn't they just have him walk out of the room and have it be built up like, ooh, he's going to be around when Batman is around, instead of having him killed off? That's the thing that I think Gotham has a big problem with, is the fact that they kill off so many of Batman's major villains before Batman becomes Batman, which I will be getting into because a lot of characters on this list who are Batman villains and are present in the time Batman's Batman get killed off, and you're going to see how many there are. Two-Face was a character who had a great setup, but due to the writers constantly having writer's block with Harvey Dent, he would disappear entirely after season 2. Instead, his dual personality plot was given to Enigma. And I think it was a big waste of the character since he's such a big Batman villain. And the fact he didn't even appear more than a dozen times, I just find ridiculous and hard to believe that a show about Gotham didn't incorporate Two-Face or the DA that much. As Two-Face not only is a great character for crime stories, he's literally the DA of Gotham. He genuinely could have had a bigger role on the show, so I find it very odd that his character was just written out without an explanation. Professor Pig is a character I think if you love gore, you'll love his character, but if you hate cannibal-type stories, then you might want to stay away. I'll say personally, I've never really cared too much for gore, and for the most part, I think, well, I've never really cared much for gore. I can take it or leave it, but Gotham had a scene in it that I think was way too far, and that was when he fed Penguin's guests meat pies made of homeless people. I almost gagged, but other than that, I thought he was fine. I didn't hate him, I didn't love him. I think it's very much just shows how Batman lore progresses with the time and different eras, and how much more gore they can include in comics. And I think Professor Pig is a great example of showing the different eras, as some eras have characters like Polka Dot Man, and other eras have Professor Pig. I think it's a really interesting idea to compare different characters from what era they come from and what way they originate from. While other characters, I think, go through multiple eras, like Catwoman, Riddler, Joker. They've gone through numerous eras and changed multiple times. Man Matt showed up for one shot, as he was set up for the next season, but due to it being shortened, we never saw him. There's not much to say about him. The Mother. I don't know how I'm meant to feel. She showed up twice, and neither appearance she did anything memorable. Also, I want to say, this is probably the speedrun characters I'm about to go through, until more or less the end of the video, because I wanted to finish on a good note. So until we get there, I'm going to be speedrunning so many characters. Magpie. She appeared in one episode where she was shot, and before dying, I thought her gimmick was fine, blowing up diamonds and stuff. Anyways, moving on. Jane Doe, same as Magpie, but her story and origin I thought was intriguing enough that I wish there was a season 6 where we got to see more of her, but we didn't, and she got shot. Anyways, moving on. Killer Croc. There were actually 3 versions of Killer Crocs who appeared. One vanished after season 2 after appearing in Hugo Strange's basement as one of the monsters. Another died in the premiere of season 3 getting hit by a truck. And the other appeared in season 5 where he was eating people and was confirmed as the real Killer Croc. And I thought it was fine. I didn't hate any of them. I didn't love any of them. They were just there. Court of Owls and Catherine to some degree. I liked them. Didn't love them. Nothing amazing like Jerome or Penguin, but I thought they were pretty interesting. I think they had a very nice build up, but I felt like they weren't as interesting as soon as they came out of the shadows, which I thought was really weird. And they also all got murdered, which I thought was also kind of weird, seeing the fact that they're meant to have been around for, a millennia, but somehow are easily dispatched. Also, I was very surprised that they had practically barely any members. There was only like 10 of them. In the comics, there is, I would say, hundreds. So maybe there's still probably some around, but we will never know as, the show ended. Personally, I would have liked to see more of them if there was another season, which we know there won't be. Either way, I thought they were okay. Maroni, annoying but important. I don't think I need to say anything any more than that, as I didn't really care too much for him. I know a lot of people liked him. Personally, I know that he was very necessary to the show and to Penguin's character, and for that I am grateful for his character to have existed, because it gave us some great scenes for Penguin, some great scenes for Fish, some great things happened with Carmine. But overall, I didn't care too much for Maroni. He had a purpose, and he fulfilled it. Fish Mooney, awesome villain to set up Penguin. I wish she would appear in mainstream Batman comics. That's how just great her character is. I think she has a great yin and yang situation going on with Hugo Strange. With Hugo Strange being the one who created the freaks, but Fish Mooney was the one who inspired them. And I think the fact that Fish Mooney has such a strong connection to so many of the, the future Batman villains, and that she genuinely is the baseline of so many of them becoming the villains they are. For example, she inspired Penguin. If it wasn't for her, Poison Ivy would never have aged up and gone those plant-like abilities. She also was one who gave Selena a chance and gave her a seat at the table. Well, not necessarily a seat at the table, but a possibility of one day having one, and which would eventually inspire her to become Catwoman. I think it's really interesting to think about how Fish Mooney is technically the creation of the Batman villains, because she was the original Batman villain, before Batman even. I think the idea of that is just so interesting. I can't believe it's not yet been introduced into comics. Carmine Falcone, great villain, but nothing groundbreaking. I thought his character was a great old school gangster type. I found him to be very compelling at times. I think the actor who plays him was very good. There's not much else to say about him, and I think that's really where I stand on his character. Sophia Falcone, I thought she was very competent and I made a great foil for James and Penguin. Although I will say, I feel like James constantly having, evil exes or crazy exes was a bit of a running gag on the show. That wasn't really a gag on the show, but more in the fan base. And Sophia, I felt like, there's an ongoing trend of that. But to be fair, Sophia was very different from both Lee and Barbara, so I think Sophia generally does stand out. And I thought her plan of Professor Pig was very thought out, although I will say, I don't necessarily buy the fact that she was the one behind Professor Pig, because didn't anyone else find it odd with what was going on? Like, Professor Pig didn't really seem to care too much for what Sophia wanted him to do, and I don't really see how Professor Pig benefits Sophia either. Maybe that was a later thing introduced, or maybe I'm just being overly critical, but I don't understand what her gain was when it comes to Professor Pig. What does she gain? What does James gain? Anyways, that's it for this video. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.